Hello guys, in our last video we saw how we updated our add user endpoint and how we added more parameters in our input payload for our user profile. So that way we were able to update both the models user and the user profile, and we were also able to query them and perform joins. Now if we inspect our input payload from the postman, we can see we're sending these set of fields in our endpoint, and then our information in our tables are updated accordingly. Okay. But we haven't added any checks or any validations right now on the endpoint. If you see, we are simply handling the data that comes in from the API, and then we simply pass them forward to our database. But this approach is actually both not correct and it's also not secure, because many times in our application, real world application, we have to validate information out of time, and we have to also ensure that our API endpoint is secure. So no malicious information is sent from the client. So it doesn't hamper, it doesn't break our code. Okay, so let's see how we can modify this API endpoint or this controller function so that we should be able to handle errors gracefully, and we also validate the information that is being passed from the client. So first of all, let's inspect what happens if we simply remove the phone number from this payload. So if I just remove this and save it and send it, you can see there is straight away an error, and this is a key error. But the problem here is that this error is generated on the server. A couple of issues here. First of all, if this error is sent to the client, it's not secure, because you see, apart from the error, a lot of information is sent out to the client, which first of all client doesn't want to see, and it can also make our system vulnerable. First of all, you see the secret is sent out, and then there are a couple of things like the system information, the path of this file. All this information is actually very critical, so it shouldn't be sent. And secondly, it also, in terms of cosmetics, it's also not presenting it properly to the client. So if our client is, let's suppose, a React application, there is no way for that React application to handle this error, because we're not sending the error and the status codes properly here. Okay. So how we can modify our endpoint is, first of all, let's wrap this entire code, in a try catch block. So we will just simply write try, and then we move this entire piece of code inside that try. And then we write except. So I will explain in the try catch in detail in the next video. So for now, I will just write except an exception. Exception is a base class which basically contains reference to all the type of exceptions that is raised by Python. So then I will simply press enter. I will just display it, and I will perform a rollback. Rollback on the database, it simply reverses all the changes if you have made any change, or if there is any temporary change being sent to the database. For example, this flush, it will simply roll back those changes, and then we are still simply returning the error here. I will move this JSON to this statement, and I will move this to a variable, and I will name it response. And similarly, I will move this function called the similar variable and name it response as well. And then at the end, I will simply return this response. Okay. So right now you can see we have written a try catch, and then we are handling any type of exception that comes in an except block. Okay. Let me modify our JSON function as well. Okay, so now we are sending a proper set of fields which can be handled by client or any client application. We're sending a message which will display the message, and then the data. And similarly, for error type, we are sending a message which will hold the error, the type of error that got generated, and then the error message as well, the error key as well. Okay, and the status code. Now let's go ahead and send this message again. Now you can see Now, first of all, that log is entirely gone because we have handled this exception gracefully. Now, this hasn't broke, like it hasn't break the log or our application at all. And secondly, we are able to set a proper set of message here. Now, moving to our validation. So you can see right now we simply take the fields coming in from our input payload and then we send it to the database. Okay, so how we can modify this is we will simply move to our routes folder for now, and I will create one more additional folder, utils, and inside this utils I will create one more module, and in this validation I will create a simple helper function and name it validate user data. And here I will write data, and then for now I will simply just pass it. Okay. Now let's go back to our API endpoint, and here let's make an input. We have an input, so we got a type in. So this is our validate function, and here we will simply call this function and pass all of our input data to this function. So what this function in turn will do is it will validate each fields. It will validate the type of validation we want to send. So whatever the type of validation we want to set for our input payload fields, we can perform all those validations inside this function and then return maybe a boolean true or false. And based on that, we can decide whether we want to move further down in our code and simply return a response. So what I will do is I will simply make a if check here and then say if it is true, or let's say I will simply write like this. If it is not true, then the data is not valid. Else I will pass down. Okay, that means now this function will return a boolean. So let me write it like this. This will now return a boolean. Okay, let's move back to the API. Now we have to decide what type of validations we want to set. So this is an email, and this is a password. This is a date type. Okay, so let's go ahead for now and set validations for our username and password only. Email and password. Okay, so I will just say email. Okay, so firstly it's saying if all the fields are present. Okay, I will remove this. Let me remove all of this, and I will simply say email and then password and then email. Okay, so now I have changed my code slightly. You can see I have added a couple of statements here. Okay, so these are the set of validations I have added. Let me add some more. So let me add a max set of characters that we can send for these fields. So for email, I have set it 254, and for password, I have kept for 128. So all these conditions will simply fail our check. Okay. Else, what we can do is we will simply return the true. That means if these conditions are not met, then our validation is successful. Let's go back to our endpoint and let's try to validate this one. Yeah, so let's try to remove our name. Okay, so let's go back to our input payload. Let's try to remove the email here. I will simply remove the email and save it and send it. You can see simply we have received the message like the data is not invalid. So this way we can set validation for each of our fields. Like for instance, I can go ahead and add one more field here, which is maybe the name that I'm sending, and say if the name is not none. And likewise, I will add the name here as well. So this will allow us to send the information that is intended in the endpoint, and also throw an error if the valid fields are not sent to our database. So if I remove the name from the endpoint now and set it, you can see the data is not invalid. In this video, I have gone briefly about the practices that we have to follow when we are writing the endpoint. Okay, so adding a try catch, handling the exceptions gracefully. So likewise in our application, we can have our endpoint can raise different type of exceptions. So instead of doing it this way, like handling all inside one base class, we can keep it something like this. Like for example, a validation. Like suppose if it's a validation error, then we can return the response in a different way, or maybe a different message. Okay. Now added to our previous validations, where we wrote a separate function, and then in that function we explicitly made all the checks and wrote statements for them. Now, instead of doing it this way, which is straightforward, but it is a little bit tedious, because anytime when we have many fields coming in our input payload, and where the checks can be a little bit complex, we have to write a lot of code for this. But what instead we can do is we can use one pretty handy library which is called as Pydantic. And in that Pydantic, we are able to define, or we are allowed to define data classes. And on those data classes, we can define the type of validations we want to set. Okay. And then we simply have to call those classes inside our code, and Pydantic will perform validations for us. So let's go ahead and let's try to use this Pydantic. Before using it directly, we have to install the library. We'll do pip install Pydantic. So this will install the Pydantic package, and then we have to define a class, data class, which again is which we have to validate our fields. So here I will say user data validator. Let's suppose I'll just remove this, and I will go ahead and create fields like email, test string, and then none, password, name as well. I will remove the none, and from here I will simply import a field called field and base model. And now this user validator, it will inherit attributes from the base model. I will remove this none. Instead, I will add a field where I will keep max line as 254 like I kept, and then I will add it for this as well, and for this as well. Now this will make all of these fields as required, and it will add the set of validation on these fields, like the max length for each field. Now let's go back into our application, and instead of importing the function, I will import our new validator that we have used. And here I will simply do it like user data, I will pass it the user data, and let's go ahead and run our code. Okay, we are having an error here. Okay, let's try to fix some of the issues. Let us remove these dots here. Now let's go ahead and call our endpoint. Okay, let's see the behavior. Okay, it's giving us an error saying phone because we have not passed the phone. Let's pass the phone for now. Or let's go ahead and add a validation for phone as well. I will simply add phone. We'll keep it in a string and 15. This is fine. So let's call it again. So you can see straight away we have an error, and it is showing that we have a validation error. And it says like the one field required and the field is missing, then data is not valid. So this way we can perform our validation using the Pydantic as well. In our next video, we will see how we can add middlewares in our Flask application, and how we can perform some checks globally in our application inside a middleware itself.